Well, joining us from Doha is Rich Outzen, who's a retired US colonel and geopolitical consultant. Welcome to the program, Rich. We know Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been asking for a no-fly zone. There was little chance that Nato would agree to this even at this summit. But short of that, he's been asking for fighter jets and other military arsenal. NATO still hasn't agreed to supply Ukraine with that. Why is it? And do you think NATO forces should, at this point, step up their support for Ukraine?
Thank you. It's good to be here with you. And I think the quick answer is yes, there could be more done. With regards to the no-fly zone, people sometimes have this false assessment that you have to apply a no-fly zone across the entire country of Ukraine, as if any missile or plane flying across it means that the whole exercise is pointless. That's simply not true. In other conflicts, such as in Syria and in Libya, it's been proven possible by Turkish forces and American forces, for instance, to prevent most flights and most attacks into specific areas through the application of air power and air defenses. You could do this in Ukraine to protect certain areas in Western Ukraine, including logistical supply lines to help Ukraine. But the Biden administration and the rest of NATO have been very leery of steps that could be seen as escalatory for understandable reasons. I would be frustrated if I were in President Zelensky's shoes, though, because more could be done. More systems could be provided, more advanced air defense and things like that. I think we should stop playing the game on the part of NATO of advertising all the things we won't do, because we are telling Vladimir Putin essentially what we will not do and how far he will not have to escalate. This gives him a lot of room to maneuver and makes it very easy for him to calculate costs, and I think that hurts deterrence.
But NATO has agreed to bolster its defences in its eastern flank. Will this help Ukraine in the immediate term, or is it more about future-proofing the NATO alliance?
I think the second of those. I think that what this is doing is making it quite clear that NATO will defend NATO territory, that any further adventurism by Putin will be met with very high costs. That's the right sort of deterrent messaging. Now, I actually am of the opinion that some NATO countries are doing much more in reality than they are doing rhetorically, or than that they're willing to admit that they're doing. I think both for Turkey and the United States, there is some, shall we say, low-key provision of additional material. We've talked about drones. I think there's been some other weapon systems that have been applied. There's a fear on the part of NATO, again, to rhetorically escalate. All of this means that NATO is sort of defensively proofing its own eastern flank, or now it's not just a flank, it's an eastern front against Russia. But in the short term, Ukraine is going to have to continue to defend itself. It's its own people, its own soldiers, its own national will. We're not going to be the fire brigade, so to speak, in the immediate sense.
Overall, what's your assessment of this extraordinary NATO summit that's just happened in Brussels? Joe Biden says the alliance is more united than ever. Do you believe that to be true?
Well, I think he's exaggerating a little. I think if you look at, so for instance, the commitment of NATO to help U.S. efforts to protect itself after 9/11, against the efforts that NATO put forth in Afghanistan in the early years of that conflict. There have been other times where there's been equal unanimity and equal sort of solidarity, but it's still remarkable. I mean, if you think about where NATO was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, there was a sort of sense that this whole security logic or rationale of the alliance was eroding. I think what's happened in the last 3 months to 6 months has been remarkable. I think people understand the security dimension of the alliance is still incredibly important. Even the Germans talking about increasing their defense expenditures up to 2%. Turkey being very much welcomed back into the fold as a valued partner. And yes, which we saw the symbolic and rhetorical unity at the summit. It is remarkable. I think it's insufficient in the case of Ukraine so far. I'd like to see more, but it is a big turnaround from where NATO was, say, 6 months ago.
Okay, Rich Outzen, we will have to leave it there, but thanks very much for joining us on TRT World.